started. Boom. So welcome everybody to our January virtual program meeting. The speaker tonight is Tim Flagler and the fly tyer is Eric Mastroberti. I think we've got an amazing program for you tonight, and we're really glad that you're here with us. As we get started and gather, I see we have, well, we had about 9 folks on Facebook. I lost my connection, but we have 10 or 11 on Zoom. To share with you that because of COVID, we're expecting to be running virtually through the spring of this year. And hopefully we'll be able to gather outside for some fishing trips, but right now we're planning virtual operations. Today's meeting will be, as is normal for us, on Zoom and Facebook Live. For those of you on Zoom, we just ask that you keep your mics muted. And we would recommend that you use the side-by-side or a speaker view. Notice that whatever view I have is the view that will be live streamed, but you have your own choice on how you want to watch the program. I would recommend the side-by-side or speaker. Please participate. It's okay to ask a question or two. Just take yourself off mute, don't interrupt, and keep your opinions and comments, so forth, to yourself. For those of you on Facebook Live, know that we're encouraging you to be part of the community, and all your questions and comments we'll be watching. Bob Carlson, TC, and myself will pass along the questions. But we'll probably wait until there's a break in the action. The first I want to do is just share, we're going to be starting with the fly tying demonstration by Eric. I'll have a few club announcements at 7 o'clock, and then Tim is going to roll right into the presentation right after the club announcements. So let me introduce to you Eric Mastroberti. He's tonight's fly tyer and one of the best fly tyers in the club. Let me go back. Let me get things set up here. And Eric, you're ready to go? Let me
Thank you, Kurt.
Stop the share.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Eric. Happy to be here. Always a pleasure to tie for you folks. And I'm not known for teaching quick. I keep trying to perfect that. So what I'm going to try to do is show you a fly this evening that is really effective in our area. It's really effective in many areas. Pretty classic, a pretty classic fly called the Jack Gartside Soft Hackle streamer. But it's been a little adapted to fit tonight's theme a little bit. And so if you are familiar with the pattern, hopefully tonight you can walk away with potentially a few different tricks to utilize, even if you're tying a different pattern. So I'm going to be tying the Gartside Soft Hackle streamer, but I'm going to do it in an intruder style. And Kirk, I'm going to just, there you go, thank you for spotlighting me. All right, so now that I got that little bit out of the way, and you can at least now put a face to a voice, I'm going to switch over to a different camera, and that way you can see what I'm doing a little better, hopefully. And maybe you can tell me things still looking okay.
Still looks good. Focus
right.
Good.
Perfect. So I'm going to do a articulated version of the Gartside Soft Hackle that is incredibly effective tied in its original way. This is just, like I said, it's articulated, it's tied in a shank, it's got some weight added to it and a few other little bits of flair. This doesn't look so great because I just got the new updated Flymen fly tester the other day, and I was swimming that fly the other day. So I dried it out, combed it out, and so it doesn't look as fresh as it could. But here we go. We're going to be using just a short shank, 35 millimeter from Fish Skull, and you can use any number of different sizes. This one fits pretty well for my type of fishing, which is, you know, a lot of trout fishing and then migratory trout and salmon. This is also a very effective lake fly. Caught a lot of fish on it, and especially, you know, I fish quite a bit for landlocked salmon, which are really known for short striking. And so putting the fly or putting the hook further back on the fly really makes it more effective for hookup rates. So we're just gonna get going on this. I'll try to cruise through it fairly quickly, and that way, if anybody has any questions on the back end, there should be a little bit of time to answer them. For those folks counting at home, this is a Vivus 30 denier gel spun thread. A lot of folks either love it or hate it. Tends to damage some tools, but that being said, it's a really nice, strong, and thin thread. So all I did was just put a layer of thread down, and now I'm gonna set up my material to attach the hook. And what I'll be using, this is a size 8 Mikatsu octopus hook, and this is just Fireline Crystal, 14 pound. This is sort of a stiffer braid material. This uses Spectra. It's incredibly strong. And the nice thing about this is it's a little bit stiffer because of that. And so what that does, you can use a lot of different materials for articulating flies, but what the stiffer material does, it's not as stiff as wire, which can cause flies to kind of swim at an angle. It's got some suppleness to it, but it's much stiffer than a like a backing, which some people use. And that the hook just kind of goes all over the place. And so this is sort of a nice in-between material. And so what I'm going to do is just feed the loop of braid going forward. You always want to make sure that it's going at the angle that you want it to be coming from. And then I'll just, this is a girth hitch, just going to pull the braid through. So you get a nice straight attachment point like that. And you can see it's got quite a bit of flexibility, but it's also stiff enough to hold the, it's kind of anchor the hook, so to speak. And what I'll do to attach this is just, I'll be inverting the hook. You can do it either way, but if the fly runs a bit deeper, and I will be tying this fly weighted, then it will help the hook from getting hung up on the bottom. Okay, so I'm just starting like that. You can see I've debarbed this hook. If you're new to tying articulated flies where you have the hook in an unusual or non-typical area, you might just consider using a little piece of foam or pencil eraser. I have more than one friend who have had to go to the emergency room with octopus hook stuck in their finger because they forgot that the hook point wasn't down here, but back here instead. So might help you out. I'll just put one layer of thread down, and then I'm gonna, because this is what's holding the hook on, I'm gonna fold that braid back and just on the front, go over it again, trim that off, like so. I'll then be using a small brass set of eyes just in front of the halfway point on the underside of the hook shank.
Hey, Eric, did you mention how long that shank is?
Yep, this is a 35 millimeter shank. And I'm gonna put some glue down in a second to anchor everything, but I wanna just get this tied in. So just some cross wraps back and forth, and then underneath, sort of horizontal, really tightens up the wraps to hold those eyes in place. All right. Now that the hook is set, I'm gonna put some fly tires Z-ment down. This is a brushable super glue. Dries pretty quickly, and it's very strong. So I'm just going to do a thin coat, and I did this after I put the eyes on, because now I can do just a dab around the eyes, and that'll help hold them in place. And this just takes a couple minutes to dry, if that. I didn't add much, you don't need much. But now that it's down, I'm going to do once more over, and then I'll be doing a little bit of a flare, so to speak, by using some, this is a Firefly, this is a skirting. It's basically a flash material, and really nice for, I never use this just as a flash, the way that you would typically tie in a flash, but I love it to add just a little bit of a triggering mechanism, just a little red throat or a red front. And so what I'm going to do, now that I tied that in on the back, is just put a layer down on the back half of the shank. And because that glue is still wet, it'll be anchored in place very nicely. So it's not going to go anywhere. I like tying flies to catch more than just a few fish. And so this helps really make the fly pretty solid. Trim that off. Then I'm going to just do a little bit more flash, silver polar flash, classic stuff. I'm going to use a total of 2 fibers. If you really want a party in the back, you can go ahead and use 3. I'm going to take 2 fibers, fold them in half, cut them. I'm going to basically get the flash set so it comes back to about where the hook ends. It'll go a little bit beyond, and that's all right. Straighten it up just a touch, fold it back over, and tie that down. All right. At this point, that glue is essentially dry, so I'm going to move on to the next step. And this is a little bit of a deviation from the original, because I'm going to be doing this, like I said, intruder style. And the difference is going to be that the marabou and the mallet in the front is going to be flared out more than the traditional. And to do that, I'm going to be using just a little bit of a dubbing. This is electric wool, and the color is Cirrus. This is it's just a wool dubbing that has a touch of flash in it, and this is put together by a guy named Jack Fields in Pennsylvania. Really nice guy, and this wool is very versatile. You can use it for many applications, one of which is this makes a very nice dense head for this fly. So I've just put a small amount onto my thread. I don't need a lot, but what I'm going to do is just a couple X wraps each way, a little bit behind, a little bit in front, and this is just going to make a dense little dubbing ball that's going to allow the marabou to stay flared out more. It's going to give the fly a larger profile, is essentially what the goal here is. The original version of this fly is a very nice streamlined minnow shape. This is just going to be a little bit of a wider profile at the head. Okay. That's pretty good. The next step is to use a marabou blood quill. Distinctly different from if you buy a woolly bugger marabou. It's got a very short, stiff stem and relatively short fibers. Blood quills are much longer and the stems are much more supple, so you can wrap them like you would wrap a hackle. And that is what gives this fly a ton of movement. And so I've already stripped the shorter base fibers off. I'm a huge fan of having just a plastic comb at my bench because I like to comb the fibers out. You can really open the feathers up with just a couple quick combs. It might look like a feather that doesn't have a lot of life to it, but once you really separate those fibers out, you give it a lot more life, a lot more movement. I'll cut the stem a touch, but not too much. I'll trim it a little more if I need to. I'm going to tie this down directly in front of that dubbing ball. And what I want to do is make sure that it stays essentially perpendicular, right, to the hook shank. And I'll just wrap that forward a little bit. I have still a bit more stem than I'd like to have. Well, I can tie that down. Okay. To make this a little bit easier, and I want to separate out any of that polar flash that might be in there, I'm just going to use some hackle pliers, and you'll need to be a little careful with them, especially at the start, just so they don't pull out, since it is marabou. And so that means it's still a little bit delicate. And I'm just going to do 4 or 5 wraps. And in between each wrap, I'm just going to encourage those fibers back. I'll do my best to not trap too many fibers, if I can at all help it. And throughout, I'll just kind of palmer this a little bit as I go, just to really try and get as many of these fibers out instead of underneath the stem itself. Almost done. Looking about how I want it. This is a pretty sparse fly, but essentially the body is the marabou. So you want to make sure that you have an adequate amount to give it that nice baitfish profile. And I did that beginner's mistake of popping the the end of that as I was finishing up, but I caught it in time. I think I'm gonna trim this up a little bit. But before I do too many wraps, I do want to make sure I comb this out, because it's at this point that I can clean it. But if I wait too long to get those last few hackle fibers, so many wraps, I do want to make sure before I really tighten down and do more of those finishing wraps. So I'm going to clean this up. Kind of looks like not that much right now. So I'm going to, again, just kind of go over all these. Now that I've made sure that I've gotten any of those last wraps out, I'm going to bring those fibers back like so. And I've tied over them a touch. This makes it more durable because you don't have as many of those wrapped stems exposed. And one of the last steps is to use some mallard flank. You can do this in a ton of colors, and so sometimes like a lemon wood duck is a nice addition instead of the mallard, but for the white, this is the way to go. So I've cleaned this feather up already, and I've palmered it. I'm going to tie this in at the tip. And I'm just going to, this is a soft hackle. It's a streamer, but it is a soft hackle, so I really want to be sparse with this. I'm going to just expose the tip down. Make sure it's tied in nicely. Trim the excess. These are not my favorite hackle pliers, but my favorite ones disappeared at a tying event, and I haven't been able to replace them yet, so they'll work. Now, the trick with wrapping this, it's palmered out. You really want to try and keep those fibers angled backwards. That'll give it a really nice profile in the water. It's not going to be perfect, and once it gets wet a couple times, you won't know the difference. But it's, you know, I like my flies to look half decent when I tie them, and so I try to, as much as possible, encourage them back. All right, that was about 2 wraps or so. Tie that off. Trim. And then we'll just clean this up a little bit. Okay. I could have done half a wrap less, but that's all right. Now, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do my modern version of the Carrie Stevens red stripe. I'm a big advocate of these small triggers built into my flies. If you do just the red on the body, that's cool. If you do just the red at the head, that's cool. If you do both, or do neither, it's whatever you have the most confidence in. If this were to be the typical fly that I would tie, I would just do the red at the head, but I wanted to give you a few different techniques scattered throughout, and that way you can choose your own adventure. Use whatever you want. Make it your own. I'll do a quick whip finish, and then I'm just going to use a touch of UV Cure. I'm a big fan of Solares personally. There's other good ones. I've just found this to be very strong, stay clear.
So, Eric, do you find that works like a hotspot, the firefly in the front like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely feel like fish find those points to focus on, and so a small visual trigger goes a long way. Gives the fish something to kind of latch onto, especially a fly like this where it's mostly white. You know, it's generally monotone, but it has that little something at the front to really focus on. And this is it's a very simple fly, but it's also a very ingenious fly. A lot of times marabou has the tendency to kind of go all over the place, and if you simply use that material, a lot of times it'll get twisted around the hook shank. But the mallard really helps to kind of encourage the marabou to sort of stay in line, right? I mean, for anybody who's a parent, if you've ever had to walk your toddler through a crowded place, you're kind of holding his shoulders and walking him through, and imagine the mallard sort of doing the same thing with this marabou, really trying to, it just kind of holds it in place because it's slightly stiffer than the marabou itself. And so in the water, this has a really fantastic action, lots of movement. And if you were to compare this version that I just tied to the original version, you'll see that this is just a much taller, more rounded profile at the front versus the very streamlined profile of the original. And so hopefully that, even if you've tied this up before, gives you a few other things that you might work on. And if you aren't familiar with articulated flies, there's just a basic primer of what goes into them. Like I said, you can do this in a lot of colors, but a really effective color is just the classic white and mallard. So there you go. If anybody has any questions or needed anything clarified, I'd love to help you out.
If anybody has questions, please go off and mute if you're on the Zoom call. If you're on the Facebook, just type into the comments and we'll pass those along. Any questions for Eric?
Eric, if I could ask one, this is Tim.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? What was the pound test on that the Berkeley fire line you used?
This is 14 pounds. Here, I'll show it again. This comes in other, you can get it in heavier, smaller, but you know, where I live in central New York in the Finger Lakes, there's not a lot that's going to be able to break that. So that's my preference for the fishing I'm doing. But of course, if I was going to travel someplace else with bigger fish, I'd just upsize a little bit. It'd be stiffer, unfortunately, but it would, you know, work very well. I've just found that wire tends to sometimes cause the fly to not swim quite right because it's so stiff, whereas this does have enough of a give to it. It seems like a nice in between versus the really supple materials, and then like a metal wire or a beetle on.
Thank you. Good.
Thing, yeah.
Eric, I have a question. People that often when people demo flies, they don't talk enough about what the fly is intended to catch and what kind of gear you throw it on. So what's your favorite fish to catch on that fly, and what kind of rod and reel and line do you throw it on?
Well, I fish a lot for landlocked salmon, and especially when they're coming in pretty fresh from the lake and pretty aggressive. This is an excellent fly for it. That being said, I'll fish it in the summer for smallmouth all the time, and I fish it a lot in trout streams. Even in the winter, just low and slow, just drifting it through. The original is not weighted. This with those bead eyes tends to anchor it in the current a bit better, so it doesn't move quite as much. It tends to kind of be more deliberate in its movement. But I guess those are the big three that I target with it. But that being said, I've caught, you know, many different species on it, lots of rainbows in some of the Finger Lakes. Yeah, it's a good general purpose fly. It's just a white streamer, so it kind of covers the gamut. And of course, you can tie this, you know, smaller or larger, just like anything else. I mean, the traditional here, this is on a size 4 Gamakatsu B10S, right? That's just a straight classic Gartside Soft Hackle. You can see the length is the same, but the hook points about the front quarter of the fly, and that's why you have a fish grabbing anywhere in the back here, it's going to miss the fly altogether, the hook altogether. But yeah, trout, bass, and salmon are the primary species. A lot of times I'll fish a 10-foot 4-weight or an 11-foot. If I'm fishing the lake, it's usually a 10-foot 7-weight. But for, you know, for moving water, 10 feet and up, you can really mend nicely and swing it in the current.
Eric, this is John Trainer. I have 2 quick questions. One, what was the size of the Gamakatsu hook that you used? And the other question is, were the eyes that you put on hollow or were they solid?
They're solid, just a solid brass. I tried to find what the weight was, and I store my stuff kind of bulk, so it doesn't specify anything besides just brass eyes, small. This is either like a nickel black or unfinished is probably what they call it. But because it's essentially just weight, you know, it's not really visible. No need for them to be like holographic or eyes on there. And as far as the hook, it's a Gamakatsu. That's a size 8. It's a fairly small hook. A 6 would be another perfectly fine hook size. Oh, hold on one second. Let me switch over to my other camera here.
Hey, Eric, we have a question that came through Facebook. Ralph Rothfelder wants to know where can you get the blood quill marabou?
Any fly shop should have it. It's not a hard material to find. It's just that you want to make sure when you're buying it that's what you're purchasing. A lot of times marabou is going to be a much shorter fiber and a really stiff stem, but if you're going into any sort of reputable fly shop, I guess I'll say, they'll have it. I mean, locally we have, you know, Mike Hogue, who you can at least order things, you know, online now. I don't know if he has the ability to have folks in his store, but if you look up blood quill marabou, you'll be able to find it very easily. It's not a rare material, but it's a really important material to make sure that you have for this, because a typical, you know, woolly bugger marabou simply won't work at all.
Well, cool, Eric. Thank you so much. Let me keep things moving along. And thanks for tying there, buddy.
Absolutely. Sorry for my laughter. I just saw a comment that made me chuckle. It feels great to tie under Tim Flagler. I don't know what. It was awesome. Hopefully, Tim thinks I did at least a half decent job of that.
Yeah, you did great, Eric. It's awesome.
Thanks, Tim.
All right. Well, I have a few quick comments, club announcements here. So welcome everybody. I mentioned at the beginning, our club is prepared to run virtually through the spring. Let me tell you that it takes way more work, lots and lots of effort to make virtual things happen. So hats off, that the board is just doing a tremendous job. Watch for communications through email and our new Facebook page, and lots of things coming out virtually through FFI and Eastern Waters. We'll talk just a touch about that. Just want to give a shout out to upcoming speakers. In February, Josh Miller will be talking about European nymphing. Josh is a member of the U.S. fly fishing team. He represents one of the emerging generation's viewpoints, and I've talked to Josh a number of times at the shows. We're really jazzed up. We've been wanting to get him for a long time. March 1st is one of our own, Chris Walker, former member of our club, who's now the director at Rio of R&D. He's going to be talking about fly lines, so mark your calendars for that. Let me just remind folks that we do have a new Facebook page. It's now been up for a month or two. We'd really, if you haven't done it yet, like you to like our page. That is actually an action. You have to hit this button there and say you like it. And the other thing we'd like you to do is share that with friends who might be interested to keep current with our club. And you do that using the invite function. So if you haven't already, please take a moment to do that. The page is an outward facing entity for the club. We'll still continue with the Facebook group, so you can share all your stories and tying tips and all that as we have for a while. Just a reminder that the video of this meeting will be posted up on the Facebook page and also on our YouTube channel. So if you missed a detail of Eric's fly or some specific on Tim's talk, you'll be able to go back and review it. The club is in the midst of a virtual fundraising effort, and hats off to Bob Walker and his team of a bunch of people. I won't remember everybody who's involved, but we realized that our normal fundraising was not going to be accessible during COVID. And so Bob and his team have stepped up to the plate, and they've started an effort to raise $1,000 virtually. We had a raffle at our last meeting. If you'd like these cool new beer glasses, you can buy those on the website. You can also donate to the club on the website. We've got an auction going on, and if you're one of the club members, there's some special pre-auction sales that are going on right now. And the good news is that we have surpassed the 50-50 spot in the fundraising goal. And I want to encourage you to check out the 32 auction website, which is where we are doing the silent auction. There's lots of different stuff that are on there, some fly tying materials, and there'll be other things going on there. There's several brand new fly lines, some used fly rods, etc. But watch for updates as we move through the month. The team has a lot of plans to add items, and you'll want to keep current with that. Also, wintertime is generally the time when most of us think about tying flies for the upcoming season. Our club has a tradition of doing master classes or master fly tying demonstrations. This season, we're going to put that on steroids, and Matt Collins has arranged for 4 master fly tying demonstrations. The first one will be in mid-January and feature John Lively. If you're a member, you should have already received an email from Matt inviting you to register to attend that. If you're not a member, this is a good time to consider joining. Secondly, for the first time since 2008, we're going to do a beginner's fly tying session. And to attempt this in the middle of a pandemic is pretty damn ambitious. But Bill Wirtz has put together a plan. In fact, the beginning fly tying session is full. It's open to 8 members, and we have 8 registered. And we'll be starting every other week. I think next week is the first session. So Bill has been putting together some plans and kits, and we're going to do our very best to do this over Zoom. And hats off to Bill for lots and lots of work to arrange things. Let's see. Okay. There's loads of other opportunities going on virtually. I just posted up on our Facebook page that the BC Fly Fishers have an interesting program tomorrow evening where they'll be doing a talk on the Delaware, and the Zoom links for that are posted up on our Facebook page. You'll want to check that out. Eastern Waters Council will be doing monthly webinars, and I do not have the date of the next one, but watch for your emails. All FFI members will get an email, and I will post that up as I learn about that. Also, a reminder that FFI sponsors a really wide-ranging number of webinars that go from everything to from fly tying to casting to Women Connects, which was a new and exciting initiative, and you want to check that out on the websites. There is a new YouTube channel which has all the past webinars on it, and it's worth checking out. So lots and lots of content virtually. All right, so it gets time to introduce our speaker tonight. It is Tim Flagler, and before I turn it over to Bob, who'll do the formal invitation, I want to show you how Tim is actually, what his setup is to do, how a pro actually does this. It's pretty amazing. So let me go back and Bob, you want to do the honors here?
Sure. You hear me okay?
Yeah, you're on, buddy.
Great. Okay, so it's our pleasure to introduce Tim Flagler. I think he doesn't need an introduction. I think everybody knows Tim from his fly tying videos online. Tim is the owner of Tightline Productions, LLC, a video production company in New Jersey, and he's most well known for his fly tying and fly fishing how-to instructions. He has his own YouTube channel, practicalpatterns.com, which has over 80,000 subscribers and 24 million views. He's also been featured or is featured on Midcurrent and Orvis blogs. He just had a tie-off with Tom Rosenbauer of Orvis this afternoon, if anybody caught that. And he's also featured on TU and FFI Learning Centers. And today, Tim is going to be talking about trout spey fishing. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tim.
Thank you, Bob. Can everybody hear me good? Okay, we're all set?
We are
Good.
set, and
All right, perfect. One thing Bob forgot to mention is that I beat Tom today. Just wanted to throw that in there. I've lost the previous two. Anyway, guys, a couple little bookkeeping things before we get started. What I'd like you to do, if you can, is go over to my picture right here, and upper right-hand corner, you'll see a blue mute button if you hold your cursor there, and then three little dots beside it. If you click and hold on the dots and then pull down to pin and let go, that will keep the video on me as opposed to jumping around to all sorts of different spots all over the place. The other thing to do, if you'd like, is down at the bottom, you'll see a little thought balloon that says chat. At any time during this presentation, you can key in over to the right, I believe it is, any question that you have, and that will be passed along to me. And we'll try to get it answered as soon as possible right there. But throughout the presentation, they're kind of logical stopping points. And so at those points, I'll stop the video. I have about 20 minutes worth of video. We'll stop, I don't know, handful of times, maybe more throughout it to get questions taken care of right then and there. This is just an introduction to Trout Spey, and there is a ton to Trout Spey, like kind of an overwhelming amount, really. And so this is just sort of a cursory overview, but really important, guys, to ask those questions as they come up. This is really geared to have you asking questions to convey as much information as we probably possibly can. So without further ado, I'm going to try to switch over. You should see someone on a large river here. And this is where Spey comes from. You know, big, long 15-foot rods, 10-weight rods, big rivers, Scandinavia. And Spey actually started in Scotland on the River Spey. And, you know, long casts. A lot of it's for Atlantic salmon, bigger, brighter flies. And all we're really doing with Trout Spey is taking these same ideas and downsizing it. And so we can use them on smaller rivers and streams here in the Northeast and elsewhere. And it's kind of interesting how I got started with this. Anybody who has seen any of my presentations has probably seen this next little bit of video, but it was fishing with this fly, pine squirrel streamer on a long shanked hook. All it is pine squirrel palmered up the hook with a pine squirrel tail and a little prop to keep the tail out of the hook bend. Anyway, has a ton of motion in the water. Ancient fly, been around forever, but worked for me very well night fishing. And this one particular night, this is almost, 7 or 8 years ago now, is night fishing, and I knew it was a nice fish, but my buddy Jimmy put it in the net. And so once we got it corralled and he was holding it and got a really good look at it, we were actually able to measure it. It was 28 inches. And this is not a common fish for here in New Jersey. This was on the south branch of the Raritan River. And you can probably tell by looking at it, it's, you know, it's definitely a stocked fish at one time, but just judging by the fins, that there's no cutoff fins on the tail. The pec fins are absolutely huge, and just sort of the shape of the fish leads you to believe that it had been in the river for a really long time. And amazing for me, an amazing catch, and one of those things that changed a whole lot for me in terms of fly fishing. It's hard to believe that one fish can actually do that, but this one did for me. And fortunately, it was a little warm that night. We were worried and held on to the fish for a long time to make sure it was recovered well, and it did. I think you can see it at the very end here. It gets a few good kicks off at the end to go. So I'm going to come back to this. What that changed for me, guys, was starting to look for better ways to actually night fish, specifically back then. And one of the problems that I was having was to get to a lot of areas where I believe these big fish hang out or come into the system at night. Longer casts, and it with those longer casts at night, if I was going to have any problem at all, it would be on my back cast. That was it. Getting hung up on trees, overhanging trees, grass, all sorts of stuff. And so, normally I'm roll casting, but trying to roll cast sink tips and these larger flies that the big brown trout in particular seem to go after, it just got to be a real workout. And so started doing a little bit of web research. And this is quite a while ago, found these guys, OPST, Olympic Peninsula Skagit Tactics. And they had come out with a thing called a commando head, and it's a very short, heavy piece of fly line, 13.5 feet long. You can see it there in the picture in blue. Below it is a shooting line. It's almost like just a monofilament line. The yellow stuff below that is backing. But what it does is it's called a Skagit head, and it allows you to do space style casts with your regular 9-foot 5-weight. And so for me, the idea of being able to do these Spey casts where there's no back cast, and it cost me right around $100 to get the whole line and a couple of tips and everything. It was a really, really quick way for me to start casting longer casts, getting nice big mends. And I'm just going to give you an example of the cast here. Just a little snap tee and off and over to that place, one of the places where a lot of those big fish like to hide. And so in the process, just very similar to the fly that Eric just tied, actually, I started modifying some of those bigger streamers that I was using to lighter weight, sort of articulated, more intruder style flies. And so this kind of is the new version of my pine squirrel streamer. Problem with that pine squirrel streamer was that long shanked hook was so hard to keep in a fish. You just couldn't let up for even a half a second. And when you're night fishing, it's very easy to let up for a half second. So that small octopus hook back there on this intruder style really stays in the fish's mouth or jaw a lot better than one of those long shanked hooks. So again, it was another thing that changed. It changed the way I fished, and also changed kind of where I was looking for in terms of my flies. So what I want to do here, guys, is I don't really, there's so much in terms of Spey casting. I just want to go through a couple of different casts just to show you what it was like. That initial setup that I was doing is something called single hand Spey. So you're using your regular, say 9-foot 5-weight, 8.5-foot 4-weight, and you're doing Spey casts, but with one hand. Here I have a two-handed rod, and I'm doing two-hand Spey casts. It's a really simple way to cast really far without a back cast. You can see the line hitting beside me. It's called an anchor where it hits. And then it's really just reaching the rod up, kind of like, think of it as a dynamic roll cast, really. And then just a quick splash on the water forms a D-loop, and then you fire it forward. It goes a country mile. The rod I'm using here is just over 11 feet long, and you can get a nice mend at the end. If you want, drop the fly down a little bit more, but this is just a very basic Spey cast. Again, touch, anchor, and go. So it looks like a roll cast. It just happens a little bit faster, more energy, and I'm using a much bigger two-handed rod. Just a couple more here just to kind of give you the feel. This is my local river. This is a south branch of the Raritan. Many places it's not especially wide. I actually have to check my casts. And this is called a double Spey. just a different way to do it. And we can talk about that just if you feel like chatting about it more, more than anything. Again, a little double spay here, just pull it over, sweep around, and then go. And you can see it's almost effortless. You really have to slow down and not try to be a power hungry, and you really have to depower everything and go slow. That's probably the number one tip I can give you, whether it's single hand spay or two-handed spay, is just slow down and reduce. You can see how little energy I'm using to do this. Very, very relaxing fishing. You take 2 casts, 2 or 3 casts, take 2 or 3 steps downstream, cast again, just cover the whole area where the fish may be. I'm going to stop right there and we'll go back. Any questions to this point at all, guys? I know I've just kind of blasted through a whole bunch of stuff, but and we're going to cover a lot of ground later, but anything I can take care of right now?
They can unmute.
You can unmute and ask, or I don't see any that we've had keyed in.
Hey, Tim, this is Eric. Just a quick question on water that calm. Do you ever feel like the weight of the line hitting the water tends to potentially spook fish, or do you feel like that's not too much of a worry?
Yeah, I actually do. And particularly, and we can talk about this. I have a different setup that I'll show you with these Skagit setups. And Skagit, there are 2 terms that we kind of have to know here. Skagit is really designed for heavier flies and heavier sink tips. There's another term, Scandi, and it's like taking that Skagit head, that 13.5-foot head, and spreading it out over a bigger distance. And it's a much more friendly landing, if you will, and much better suited for smaller flies, wet flies, things like that. Our old streamers, Mickey fins, black-nosed dace, things like that. Whereas these Skagit heads, if you're throwing big sink tips, maybe in faster moving water with bigger flies, that's where those Skagit heads really come in handy for dredging up and throwing out bigger, more wind resistant patterns. And so, yeah, I do worry about that splash, and I'll show you the setup in just a minute that I'm using for most of my stiller water trout spay fishing. I should say at this point too that trout spay is a very, very strange term. It kind of like Euro nymphing. It's trying to compress a whole bunch of ideas into one area, and it really doesn't work for any of it. And it kind of makes sense for the rods because they are not normal spay rods. They're generally less than 12 feet in length, and they're anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5 weight. Not really acceptable for Atlantic salmon or steelhead or anything like that. They're really kind of downsized for trout, bass, carp, and so that collective term trout spay seems to fit with the rods. But if you start using terms like trout spay flies, then it gets really confusing because spay flies don't really look like trout spay flies at all, and it gets a little messy. But to me, trout spay flies are things like intruders, articulated flies, again, that are just downsized for smaller species such as trout.
Tim,
Anybody?
George Race, I have a question. You're going to have a net there. So are you going to talk at some point about how to land these fish with those long rods?
I didn't have a net, Joe, and it is a difficult thing. And you guys that are Euro nymphers will know this too. When you have an 11-foot rod, to get that thing landed, I usually do fish with a net, but a lot of times when I'm doing this, the rod is heavy enough on most fish. Even a 2-weight trout spay rod is more like a 5-weight rod, to be honest with you. And you can really put it to a fish And a lot of times I'll get it in there and I'm going to grab the leader, just pull them in and do a hand release on them. Even with a net, it's a long reach and a little tricky, takes some getting used to. Anybody else? Any other questions? Alrighty, I'll keep on going then. Let me get back to this. So I just want to show you a couple of different setups. This is that first one. This is like the jumping off point. And my setup, my regular 9'5" weight Scott Radian rod, I've had it for years, that I use for just almost all my trout fishing at this point. It's just the one I reach for. But all I did was I got a separate spool for my Galvin reel, and put one of these OPST commando heads on it. 200 grain is what they recommend for that rod from OPST. It's only 13.5 feet long. And I put a floating tip, a very short floating tip off the end of it that's only 20 grains and just 5 feet long. It tapers down from the really heavy head, tapers down nicely, and I just run tippet, like 4, maybe 5 feet of tippet, straight tippet off the end of that, usually like 2X. You don't have to go especially light. And this is the one that does the single hand Spey casts, which are a really, really interesting cast. And again, I think this is a good way into Trout Spey and into Spey for that matter. And so I cast downstream to get everything straightened up. It's called a snap tee, back, around, and just out. And very, very easy to learn. It does take some practice. You want to have, let me stop. You want to have the entire head out of the tip of your rod when you start this cast. And well, you'll see it on another one. You can see the head pulling around. You can also, as you can see here, I can add a haul into this cast, which you can't do with a two-handed Spey rod. So you can really energize these casts. You can do a true double haul within the cast. And again, you know, it's not a whole lot of extra money added in to start doing this. The only problem is it's so addictive that you start doing it with the single hand, and it's just a matter of time before you're looking at two-hand Trout Spey rods, and then you're looking at 7 weights and beyond. And so yeah, it's a deep rabbit hole, but it's so much fun to do. And yeah, it's hard to believe for me looking back. I'm gonna go back here. That one little thing, just trying to change my night fishing, led to all this. And I guess that happens in fly fishing a lot. But and I'm very glad it did. Even when I go back and I'm using just a regular weight forward line trout fishing, I'm using some of these Spey casts, some of these techniques to get reoriented quicker, to get back upstream, as opposed to doing the lawn sprinkler, do it with back casts. It's a snap tee to bring my fly line up here and then a roll cast back out. So it has practical application other than just a Spey. Any questions on that single hand Spey or that OPST setup, guys?
So Tim, are you going to talk more about like the casting techniques?
A little bit, Kirk. It's like I said, this is more like an introduction. There are so many casts that you can do, and many of them, and we'll just go over this real briefly. Many of them, you see literally dozens of different Spey casts, and most of them have to do with what side of the river you're on, which way the wind is blowing, and which way the current is flowing. And so if you're on one side of the river, you might use a snap tee cast, where if you were fishing from the other side of the river, same day, same conditions, you might want to use a double Spey cast. And the idea is to keep that fly line, you saw it hitting the water, is you have to have that on your downwind side. Else that fly is going to come and right in the back of your head. When you're practicing this, guys, I would highly recommend glasses, absolutely glasses. Put on a hat, wear a heavy jacket. You're going to hook yourself it just lends itself to doing that. So you get things figured out. Also, you don't want to have your anchor point too far upstream from you in fast water, or it's going to come down. Even in the time that it takes to land on the water, it's going to come down and it's going to again push that line into you, which isn't good. So what I'm saying is those Spey casts, you just need to learn 2 or 3 of them. That's it to get started. You can, the snap C, the snake roll, inverted snake roll, parry poke, all these other casts that you see people doing. They're fun to learn, but they really aren't essential to get started.
So I take what your talk is more to get those folks who are not familiar with Trout Spey interested enough to look into learning how to gear up for this style. Yes.
Yes. And it's essentially giving you guys that one little taste of the drug, so you go out and and end up spending your life savings pursuing Trout Spey stuff. And just because in this next setup, I'll show you how I got there, and maybe I can pass some of my addiction along to you.
Okay,
And so, and we will. I'll show you a few more casts as we get in there, and some of the flies I'm using and stuff like that. But
we do have one other question. Ken wants to know: are you going to mention OPST's integrated lines?
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, good question on the OPST's integrated lines. That setup that I showed you that had the commando had the tip and then the running line or the shooting line behind it. They now make a couple, OPST makes a couple of lines, Rio does, Anglers does, that it's integrated. It's not a separate head. And for most people, they're more comfortable. There aren't knots to deal with. There aren't loop-to-loop connections. But for me, I really enjoy a system that's interchangeable. If I want to change out my shooting line, I can do that. I can put on a separate head. I can put on separate tips. If anything wears out, I can get rid of it. And to me, I like the nylon, the kind of fishing line, shooting line. It just hauls through the guides, and when it's out there, it's no drag, just very, very light. But yes, they do make full integrated lines, and in the show and tell, I got some ones to show you too that I think are worthwhile. We all set?
You can let me know that I'll be sending out these.
Oh yeah, Joan is informing me that she'll be sending out what these setups are. So if you feel like getting started that way, you'll have all the numbers. You can get so lost in grain weight and everything else, particularly, with lines, it's just, it gets really, really crazy. So back to the video first a little bit here. So second setup, very, very, I don't know how they do this. It's, right around $500, I think, for the whole Orbis setup. This is an 11-foot 4-inch true two-handed rod, 3-weight, and shooting line, same thing. It's kind of, this is a coated line that they ship with it. So not a true mono running line, but this has got a Scandi light head on it. You can see it's only 180 grains and it's spread out over 20 feet. So compare that to the 200 grains spread out over 13 and a half feet, like on the previous one. And so here I tend to lengthen it out. I use an Orbis poly leader that's 7 feet long, and instead of an actual head on the commando head, and then off of that I'll just run a little bit of tippet, maybe 2 or 3 feet off either a swivel or a better yet a tippet ring. And so this allows for much more gentle presentations to trout. Really, to me, more acceptable for water conditions like this. Again, this is a snap tee. Anchor comes up about a rod length away, and I'm off to the races. Little mend upstream helps it to drop faster, gets your fly down to that critical depth. And again, just I can't stress it enough. how little energy you need. And if you try to overpower it, you're going to be miserable. Again, just comes around as a snap tee. Snap tee is a relatively easy cast to learn. So's the double spey. Believe it or not, the single spey is harder to learn timing wise, but if you have a good snap tee and a double spey, you're pretty good on most river conditions. Much of what's happening with the two-handed rod, watch my bottom hand. My bottom hand is really doing most of the heavy lifting. The top hand, a lot of it is just pivot, but watch me pull in with my bottom hand. That's where all the power comes from. That rod's really just rotating in my top hand. And you'd be amazed at how far you can cast. Again, goes up, anchor. This is loading the rod all the way through. You keep the rod loaded, comes back, forms a D loop, and then just punch it forward. Pull in with your bottom hand, push out a little with your top. Very, very efficient way to cast a fly line. So we'll tear through one more here. I included this because this is the kind of the extreme example. Different setup, a little heavier rod, a little shorter rod, 10'6", heavier shooting line, 35-pound test. And I would use this setup on bigger, faster, deeper water. OPST commando head. So again, a short head. This one's 225 grains. And on the end of that, I'm going to put an OPST sink tip, which is 96 grains and 12 feet long. It's a lot of weight. If you were trying to cast that much tip with a regular rod, you'd be miserable. And roll casting would be even worse. And so what I did here is to make matters even worse, I put a shovel head fly, one of these deer hair diggers that some people call them. And it's like trying to throw a ping pong ball on the end of your line. A lot of air resistance, big deer hair head on it, and just a pain in the neck to cast. But with this rig, a little snap tee, no problem at all. You'll see in a second what this fly looks like going through the air. Actually makes a big splash here. So critical part of the line out comes up. There's my anchor point, that nasty fly digging in. On the sweep, rod stays loaded, and then D-loop, and then it's gone. And even that big wind resistant fly just lays out, no problem at all. Even with a big sink tip, which you need to keep those things down and actually swimming and fishing correctly. They're great flies, but oh my gosh, what a pain to cast in most cases. This is, incidentally, guys, this is not a good video piece to show what I'm doing here because it's so telephoto. It's very, very compressed depth of field, if you will. But this area is excellent for this type of fishing. Problem is, you can't get too close to that bank or you're pushing fish away. There are also trees right behind me. This is what it looks like. Sorry, in real life, you can see that boat, but as I come down a little further, you'll see there's a big tree off to the right that you want to cast from to that far bank. And that big tree, you can see the branches coming in, absolutely keeps you from being able to do a back cast. And at the same time, there's deep trough on the far side where that blue boat is, and that's where the fish are. And they'll follow your fly. You cast over into the deep, it swings into the shallow, and they usually take it just as it's coming up on the shelf. But if you try to get too far across the stream to roll cast, if you don't have one of these setups, you end up spooking the fish a lot of times. Here's another different spot, same case, deep water over on River Right, and then you've got all these obstacles on the beach where you come in from. You can't back cast. just a nightmare. And you can roll cast over to that. It's not that far in this case. The problem is there's an overhanging tree and you're trying to do a good roll cast. You can probably see some of the gear hanging off those branches, but deep, deep water on the far side. Anywhere where you have deep water coming up onto a bank like that is a perfect, perfect place to throw these Trout Spey rigs. This place I include just because if you were just a normal, you're trying to chuck streamers to cover this water. This near side, you can't fish it. You can't get in the water. There's nowhere to back cast. The way to fish it is to go on that far bank all the way up to the top and then start casting down and across at 45 degrees. Problem is up there, you can't back cast. And the other problem is, as you get down further, even if you get the back cast out, it's a very, very long, at least a 60-foot cast. And that very difficult to do in most cases with just a regular, 9-foot 5-weight weight forward line. So the extra distance, no back cast with the Trout Spey rigs really, really helps with this water. And I start up at the top there, work my way down the bank, and then go back down again. Before we move on, any other questions to this point? I realize I'm just flying through this stuff, but anybody else? All righty, I'm gonna keep moving then. So what are we actually trying to do when we're doing this? We are casting to trout, and you'll see the suckers. It's New Jersey. They're omnipresent and love the camera, but 90% of the time, trout are down. They're less than a foot off the bottom. That's where the food is. Again, the suckers. That's where they're safe from prey up above, and there's generally a current cushion there, less effort to swim. And so if we're swinging, which we're doing with most of the time with Trout Spey gear, swinging streamers and the like and wet flies, we need to get them down there. And that's where those heavier tips really come in handy, that you can cast with these Trout Spey lines and rigs. So very easy to get flies down there. And because a lot of times you're using sink tips, not weighted flies, you're putting more natural looking flies down into that zone where the fish are. Weightless or nearly weightless flies, which to me swim way, way better than flies that have a ton of weight on them anyway. So using the line to get down there as opposed to the fly. What are we imitating? We're imitating the things that trout eat down there, not necessarily the bugs. There are better ways to, nymphing is far better really for imitating bugs, but in most cases, where a lot of times we're just imitating bait fish, dace, darters, sculpins, baby trout, all sorts of bait fish forage that virtually all our rivers and streams have here. And trout like to eat them. Takes a little bit of energy, but a fly that's swung down and across is probably the best way to imitate these bait fish. Little tessellated darter, one of my absolute favorite bait fish species. They're gorgeous and absolutely so plentiful in our rivers, it's ridiculous. When we do stream sampling here in New Jersey, they really don't even count them anymore. So to imitate that, woolly buggers, this is a pattern that I really like. It's called a squirrel and hurl bugger. It does a very good job at imitating just about all those different bait fish species. You can see it swims. That pine squirrel tail, to me, is just magical. Has a lot of fine markings in it, like the bait fish do. Here I have just a split shot up there, but swinging down and across. That one's up a little high in the water column. The other thing I said that doing this really changed the way I fly fish. I'm going back to flies like that Mickey fin that I haven't even thought about fishing for years and years. And I just kind of opened up a whole thing that was closed off. those old style streamers are really, really well suited to trout spey fishing, you know, down and across, just swinging it across, maybe a little strip at the end. Excuse me. And so how do I fish them? Again, down and across, maybe a little upstream bend helps the fly to drop down the water column. And then I just straight swing most of the time. If I come in on the dangle, in other words, all the way downstream, I may do a little stripping. All I can say about stripping in is just make sure you vary it. I can't tell you that one way works, and day to day, just minute to minute, change it up until you find something that works, but don't depend on that working 10 minutes from then. Very important to keep everything variable when you're doing it. Even you're down and across, whether it's 60 degrees or 45 degrees, to me, there's no rules to it. Keep your rod tip low, really helps on the hook sets. And a lot of times I'll just pull back on the rod for my hook set. But a couple of casts, move downstream, take a few more casts, and just keep it going. Cover a whole deep bank if you can. Gonna stop there. And back, any other questions to this point? You all hanging in there? Good. Okay, so I said that the bait fish, you know, that's the primary thing that we're imitating when we're with the flies we're using and how we're making these casts. But there are certain insects that lend themselves really, really well to this type of fishing, and this is one of them. This is an Isonychia nymph, very, very active for an aquatic macroinvertebrate. The twitches of how they force water past their gills, actually. And so because they're so active, they're magnificent swimmers. They actually swim like minnows. I'll show you here in just a second. And come on, buddy. There you go. And so something that moves like that, this is my imitation of that. It's an old, kind of adapted an old Preston Jennings pattern. Kind of made it a little more modern and suitable for me. This is what I use to imitate swimming Isonychia nymph, and just absolutely swung straight, and then maybe little teeny strips at the end of the cast has been just deadly for me the last 2 years, from like June, if we have the water, all the way till November. And particularly if the fish are up suspended a little bit, maybe feeding higher in the water column, works real well. This fish is feeding. This is during the Hendrickson hatch, trying to pick off nymphs as they're going up to the surface to hatch and become winged adults. This is where the game kind of changes. Excuse me, I gotta get back here. You know, I'm definitely looking more for the Scandi lines, more delicate touch, and smaller flies, soft hackles and the like. To imitate these nymphs that are swimming up to the surface, maybe even partially emerged as they're going up before they reach the surface. Even during the hatches, a lot of fish do stay down deep. They know where the food is. And so during a hatch, these nymphs will often test swim up to the surface before the hatch. And again, it's a great time to imitate them with Trout Spey type flies. Soft hackles in particular do an amazing job of imitating those. This is one of my patterns, little off color on the name, but it's called the Major Woody, and looks like just so many different bugs that we get in the springtime, whether it's Hendrickson, sulfurs, March browns, gray fox, all sorts of things. And I just swing it down and across, fish it like a wet fly. It's interesting though that you can dry that pattern out and fish it like a cripple on the water surface. Same thing, old light Cahill, soft hackle, just a deadly fly on the swing that I kind of disregarded for years. I wish I hadn't. Another one, good friend of mine, Bob Romano. This is basically the only fly he fishes up in Maine. It's a hare's ear wet, as old as the hills. Kind of a pain to tie. The wing gets all chewed up, but super deadly little wet fly. And again, I probably wouldn't be tying those flies that much if it weren't for how well they worked. Another one that's very, very suitable for trout spey fishing are the October caddis. And the reason is October caddis don't actually hatch out on the water surface the way most caddis do. Most all October caddis will, as pupa, will swim to the shore and then crawl up on the rocks and hatch out as winged adults on the rocks. So they really, until they come back to lay their eggs, they're not ones that spend any time on the water surface. You're much better fishing pupa like this one, little soft hackles, just a couple inches below the water surface, maybe an intermediate tip to get it down just a little bit, but a lot of times just on a floating line. And if you can find those shucks on the rocks anytime from Labor Day, through November, find the shucks on the rocks and then go back and fish that at night. And some of the most violent takes you can ever imagine. You'll see the fish coming, usually wake behind these little soft hackles. Skating flies are another one that with trout spey rigs work real well. You get a long swing with V weight going behind these guys. They look great. And towards dark, the October caddis can produce just some amazing fish. Another one, this is going to be a little weird, but a crane fly larva, mop fly, but crane fly larvae flatten their rear segments out and swim like little eels. A lot of people don't know that. And so it's probably why the mop fly works so well. That mop becomes one with the water and wiggles like crazy and swung just incredible. Old Polly Rossborough pattern, the casual dress. I'm pretty sure whether they intended it to be a crane fly larva or not, it sure as heck looks like one to me. And again, is just a deadly swung fly. Love fishing them. And yeah, that's that's a pattern for the big browns.
Hey Tim, I've got some question, and it's kind of directing towards a question that emerged on Facebook. But first, just come back. Is you started talking about soft hackles and using trout spey techniques with soft hackles, but I have a little background in this. I'm asking this for the beginners in the crowd. Tell more about this Scandi line and how that compares to the Skagit, and how you're using that in delicate presentations.
Sure. The Skagit, again, is designed for heavier flies and heavier lines, okay? And it's a much shorter, heavier head, the Skagit is. Scandi is, you basically take even less weight and spread it out over a longer area, a longer head and a longer tip, if you will. And so it's just much less weight and diameter that's hitting the water on a particular cast. It's kind of like the difference between fishing in, let's say, a 7-weight and a 2-weight weight forward line. There just isn't that big splash. You can really just lay a nice loop out there and have those flies drop right on the water. But since you mentioned it, Kirk, I'll go off on a soft hackle kick for a little bit because I love soft hackles. It was the other thing that I found with this. Once I got that Scandi line, I started, going back in the books and looking at the way these guys with wet flies and North Country spiders and fishing a brace of 3 and 4 flies. It's so perfect for this type of fishing. And 3 flies, it works just fine. And what you'll find is you put 1 fly on and it swims one way. You put a second fly on behind that, say a foot or 18 inches behind it, it influences the swing and the movement of the first fly. And you put a third fly in a line, all daisy chained, and all of a sudden the whole rig is going like this, and the flies are moving like natural insects. And it's just amazing to watch it kind of do this serpentine through the water as it swings across. Really, really cool. But those are so much better fished on a lighter Scandi line than they are on a Skagit.
So Tim, there's a number of people in our club, a number of people in the call here, really soft hackle aficionados, and some of us have started to use those Trout Spey tactics in fishing soft hackles. The question on Facebook came up is Vince Leonard asked, he was using that tactic and there was a hatch going on, lots of fish rising, and when he started to use his Trout Spey tactics, it put all the fish down. And so do you have any kind of recommendations or thoughts of how do you keep that disturbance to a minimum in those times when you got fish rising and you want to use soft hackles?
Yeah, I've heard that before. To me anyway, if it's a full-on dry fly hatch like that, I'm probably not going to be, doing Trout Spey really. If I'm swinging soft hackles, I've probably just got my 9'5" weight forward line, and I'm bouncing back and forth between, a soft hackle and a dry fly if all those fish are up. But I will tell you a story from not this year, because I didn't get up there because of the COVID, but I was up for a big sulfur hatch on the west branch of the Delaware a couple of years ago. And in a drift boat, guy was on the oars, friend was in the back, I'm up front. We've been, sulfurs and low water all day long. Just, the upper Delaware can be real tricky. But we came down and little island, the gravel bar came up a little bit, anchored the drift boat, got out, and full blown sulfur hatch going. But I got to tell you, I fished it, this is getting towards dark. I fished it for about 20 minutes. I was so burnt from that day of casting to rising fish and having refusals and everything else. I went and changed my reel out and went and was casting a soft hackle sulfur. And I am not kidding you. It was almost too easy. And those guys, I had to go 6-1. They were both fishing dry flies. And, I, definitely was not putting fish down. Those fish that wanted to eat off the top were absolutely eating off the top. And they could not resist that soft hackle. And that was, that was with one of those short Scandi heads too. That was not even or Skagit heads, not even a Scandi. So.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
No, I think that you have a lot of friends here that are soft hackle leaning and
good.
and also finding that the Trout Spey tactics really add to their game, and it's a hell of a lot of fun to cast that way.
Yeah, I also will say, and I usually save this for the end, but I guide down here in New Jersey, and most of the guiding that we do, because the river suited so well, is Euro nymphing, and you spend the entire day just burning a hole in a sighter or in an indicator, just staring at it, and that's what you have to do to be successful when you're Euro nymphing. To me, there is nothing more relaxing than, even after a full day of guiding, I'll go change, say goodbye to the clients and go and grab my 3-weight 2-hand rod and just cast down and across. You're just waiting for the bite. You can look up, you can see the birds, the trees, everything else that's going on. And to me, it's just so relaxing. And honestly, there's something, maybe it's just a little kid in me, actually feeling the bite is, gosh, I mean, 60 years in, and it still does something for me. And even if it's a short bite, it's something that just gets you going. And again, that's where one of the Trout Spey really excels. I think I have a little bit more video, guys, not much, but and happy to answer more questions at the end if that's okay. So just one of the things people ask me about line management, I learned this really, most of the time you don't have to do it. You're not casting that much line, but I hold the line in my front hand of all places. And to me, it's closer to the stripping guide and generally goes out there really, really well. I'll show you one more time. It's also at the end. I'm not worrying about collecting line. It's only after it's all stripped in that I start making loops and pin it on my front hand. And you'll see a little slow down here, but most of the time, those loops really go flying out of there. I learned that up in Nova Scotia last year. Kind of a neat way to do it. So yeah, almost at the end here, just a little more kind of from my perspective. I shot this last March on just a horrible, horrible evening when you really wouldn't expect to be catching fish swinging flies, and swinging fairly large flies at that. A little snow on the banks. It was kind of misty, snowy, rainy, yutch. This is a 4-weight with a pretty decent sink tip on it, and nice fish just on a pine squirrel streamer, that squirrel and hurl. And you can see just easy cast. It's going all the way to the far bank, the deep channel, and resulted in a real nice fish. And yeah, just always surprising to me that I can catch fish on streamers, in February and March. Maybe see a little snow coming down there. Ready for a hot shower and a hot cup of cocoa after that night. But yeah, you pretty much do it year round. And I'm going to pause there. Also real good for you guys that are into the nighttime mousing. The Trout Spey gear is just perfect for that as well. And again, just as the last little kind of selling point is no back casts, longer casts, and change of direction very, very quickly. That's the big three. Also, just a heck of a lot of fun. Any more questions, guys?
Yeah, I got one, Tim.
Yeah, shoot.
You showed us a lot of different rigs. How
Yeah.
many of them do you take to the water with you?
Well, I'd really like, here, I'll actually show you the rigs here real quick if we could. I'd like to drag all of them to the river with me all the time and just cast all of them if I could. They're that much fun to mess around with. And so here are the rigs. This is the 9'5" weight with the real short, heavy OPST head on it for single hand spey. This is the 3-weight with the Scandi, the Orvis Clearwater, and then this is the bigger one, the 4-weight with the heavier Commando head on it. I would like to recommend to guys that if you're doing this, just be absolutely sure before you start buying these lines to ask somebody who knows, to test the gear. You can spend a small fortune getting the right line on the right rod. Most rod manufacturers and line manufacturers recommend the stuff, but really best to talk to someone who tests it and knows. Otherwise, you can spend a whole lot of time trying to learn something, and it's not you that's messing up, it's the gear. And if you have the improper line and tip on a specific rod, it is not going to work. And so I do highly recommend if something like this Orvis package, I don't want to tout any brand, but this Orvis package, the whole setup came as one thing, and they've tested it 200 different ways with every different line imaginable, and that's what they ended up with. So it may not be the perfect line for it, but it's kind of a compromise line that's going to work in the most conditions for the most people anyway. The other way around it is in terms of lines, things like the Versatip where you get the line, you get everything is together in one box, and a selection of tips that generally come in a tip or leader wallet like this. And so you know that these tips are going to be matched with that particular line. They give you a little card that shows you every different one that can be used, and really makes it functional. And so you carry this with you, and I can switch one of these tips out in a matter of seconds. And so I can go from a full floater to a deep sinker, depending on the water, just changing the tip out on them. Very functional system.
Hey, Tim, I've
You don't
Yeah, go ahead,
necessarily have to drag more than one rod. You just take your tips with you.
Yeah, you take the tips with you, and you judge the rod, based on just this, really the water that you're fishing. If I'm here in New Jersey, I'll pretty much the 3-weight all the time, unless it's on a big water spot, and then I'll bump up to the 4-weight. Upper Delaware, where it's a lot more water and a lot more variable conditions, I'll use the 4-weight and carry a whole range of tips, and actually have a reel with a Scandi line set up, and then another reel with a Skagit line set up for that. I dearly love to get a 2-weight at this point, Trout Spey 2-handed rod, just for it to go even smaller with the stuff if I could. That's in the works. Any other questions, guys?
Yeah, Tim, I wanted to, so if I am a fly fisher, but I'm not done the spay gig, what's the best way to get started?
Okay, we call that Spey Curious, Kirk.
Okay.
And I would say that first setup, just use your regular rod that you're used to trout fishing with, and get one of these short Skagit heads. It doesn't have to be OPST. Everybody's making them. Airflow Scout, Rio's got these short trout Skagit heads, 10 to 15 feet long, with all the tips that you need. And I'd go that way and learn to spay cast single-handed. And, for less than $100, you're using the same rod you always do. And I'm telling you guys, just with a spare spool, you bring one rod, your 9-foot 5-weight, 2 separate spools. One's got a weight forward line on it, 5-weight line for nymphing, for dry fly fishing, but have that other spool with you with the commando head on it, or whatever, the Skagit head. You feel like doing some streamer fishing, pop that in there, and off to the races. Have 2 or 3 tips with you for different water depths, and I mean, you have a really complete system right then and there.
Cool. And what about getting started with the casting? What's a good way to get?
Well, we are so lucky now. There are just tremendous resources, video resources that I mean, can you imagine learning spay casting from a book? It's such a dynamic thing, and there's so many different planes that it's happening on. YouTube has got more great casting videos. My advice, though, is stick with someone who really knows their stuff. Simon Gosworth from Rio being a number one. You'll get to see other guys as well, but that I would recommend as a starting place. And Rio has a full learning center, and they break it down really, really well. Simon is one of the best instructors in the world, and not just for spay casting, to me, for just about everything. Really incredible.
Cool. While I've got the floor, we got a question from Facebook that came in, and this is on what do you like for a running line? What would you recommend?
For that running line, I actually like the OPST laser line, but a lot of people don't like it. It's very much like an Amnesia, or one of those lines that doesn't have a whole lot of memory. And it, to me, it just, once the head is going, it's the laser line is so light and goes through the guide so smoothly. It just, to me, there's nothing else like it. But a lot of people don't like the feel of that line in their hands. It's too narrow and too slippery for them. So you can go with a coated running line if you go that way. And they're just imagine this wicked thin fly line. And that's what the coated ones generally are.
Cool.
Okay, somebody asked me about line weights and upsizing to use. Now, the question was, if you have a 3-weight Trout Spey outfit, switch to a 6-weight single hand rod fly line. That won't work. The taper on these Skagit and Scandi heads is entirely different than a weight forward line. A weight forward line will not load one of these rods. Even if you go up in size, finding that critical point, how much line you have out to start the cast, really isn't going to work. And because there's a much longer taper at the end of the line. Just not designed to cast that way. You can sort of do it, but it's just not very functional.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
I do that all the time. However, I agree with you in terms of spey casting. Just switch the line over and use it as a standard overhead, regular dry fly rod. Then when the hatch goes off, you want to go back to nymphing, or you want to go back to swinging, then change reels, boom, you're right back into your other game. I think a Trout Spey rod is the most versatile trout rod you'll ever have in your entire life. You also have to be aware, though, that there are, and I'm sure you are, but there are 2 industry standards, one for standard single hand rods and one for 2-handed rods. A lot of people get into this thing, start it, and don't realize that there's 2 industry standards that's critical to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Selecting lines, heads, the whole 9 yards. But you can, in fact, dry fly fish with a weight forward line. You just need to upsize it by 3 line sizes, works like a champ. I use a 3-weight Trout Spey myself.
Oh, okay, but for overhead casting as opposed to spey casting.
Oh, absolutely. But by the same token, I've been single hand spey casting with a standard rod for 20 years, maybe. All right.
Okay.
So a lot of this stuff works. It just works better with the new lines and
new lines. Yeah, and those spey techniques, to me, people watch me trout fish now with my regular weight forward line, and they're like, "What the hell are you doing? What's all this flipping around stuff?" And I'm using those spey techniques to relocate my cast. If I'm downstream and I want to get back upstream real quickly, I'm going to do a snake roll and go back out. I can do that just with my normal setup, no spey gear at all. So yeah, you can use spey techniques across a whole bunch of stuff. Anybody else? We good? I don't want to go too long here, guys.
I think you're fine.
Your show and tell.
Oh yeah, I think oh yeah, that was the only other one I wanted to show you guys is to do, again, I don't want to hawk any one brand too heavy here, but as packages where you have everything put together, whether it's a Scandi or a Skagit, really helps to keep things all matched up and we're working correctly the way it should. I will also, I just want to add one more thing, because we just touched on it there. And that's one of the things that you can do is, if you want to cast these things overhead cast, they will go a country mile, particularly with a double haul added into it. So if you're in a panic, you really don't know what to do, you have some room to back cast, just make sure you have a lot of shooting line out, because when you do a double haul with one of these heads out, it's like casting a heavy lure is what it's like, a 13.5-foot long lure, and they really fly.
Yeah, folks may be aware that like Blaine Chocolate's beginning to talk about, he's using Spey rods for his muskie fishing to throw those huge flies, just because you're throwing huge flies and heavy weighted lines all day, and it's so much easier to get the leverage to do that with a Spey rod. So what I think is really, really cool about fly fishing is the innovation is going on where we're learning from all angles. And I think we've made the case here that we can, as trout fishermen, as trout fishers, we can use these Spey tactics even with our trout gear, but versa versa. If you got Spey gear, you're not out of the game to just change up and fish a dry fly. This is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it's as I said earlier, it's addictive, and so I'll take it even a step further. I don't want to keep you guys too long, but that one little problem that I had with night fishing, wanted to get over to that deep spot, went from there, and that was probably 5 years ago now, and now I'm looking at 15-foot 9 and 10 weight rods for casting long belly Spey lines. And so it's a deep rabbit hole. And, you're looking at just how much a trip to the Panoy in Russia would actually cost. All from solving one little problem. And, yeah, but it's fun. It's great stuff. Love doing it. We all set, guys? Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And any questions? One real good way to get to me is just to drop a comment on any of the flies on YouTube. I answer comments every morning, as many as I possibly can, and that's a real easy way to reach me. Doesn't matter what fly it's on or anything, I'll end up getting it. Or of course you can email or whatever you want.
Well,
all right.
Yeah, great. So let me close things out and thank everybody for attending tonight. We had a great turnout, and wish you a happy new year. Thanks to Tim, thanks to Eric for a very interesting evening indeed. So wish you a happy new year and look forward to lots of cool stuff going on with the club. That's it for tonight. Good night.
Thanks,
Thank
Tim.
you, guys.
Thanks,
Enjoy.
Eric.
Hope to see you on the water.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you.